First impressions are rarely neutral. They're judgments made fast, often lazily, and usually with more confidence than accuracy. In this story, the first impression wasn't just wrong, it was aggressive. A new person walked into an unfamiliar space, and instead of curiosity, she was met with hostility. Not because of anything she did, but because people decided she was an easy target. New meant unprotected. Quiet meant weak. Different meant disposable. That's how first impressions turn into weapons. They stop being observations and start becoming excuses. Excuses to mock. Excuses to test boundaries. Excuses to see how much damage can be done without consequences. When a group sizes someone up and decides they don't matter, cruelty becomes casual. It feels justified, almost fun. The first insult is brushed off as humor. The first shove is called a joke. By the time real harm happens, everyone involved has convinced themselves it was inevitable. What makes first impressions so dangerous is how little evidence they require. A posture, a lack of eye contact, not talking enough, talking too much. People fill in the gaps with whatever story flatters their own position. If they feel powerful, they assume the other person is powerless. If they feel insecure, they project that insecurity outward. The target doesn't get to speak before the verdict is handed down. The story is written for them. In this case, the label "new girl" did all the work. It stripped her of history, experience, and complexity. It reduced her to a placeholder. Someone temporary. Someone replaceable. Someone who wouldn't fight back. That label allowed others to forget she was a person with a past, with skills, with limits. It allowed them to forget that bodies break, teeth shatter, and trauma doesn't disappear just because the crowd thinks it's earned. First impressions also spread fast. One person decides you're weak, and suddenly everyone sees you that way. No one wants to be the odd one out defending the person already marked. Agreeing is safer. Laughing along is easier. Silence feels neutral even when it isn't. The initial judgment becomes a shared reality, reinforced with every glance and comment. Challenging it would mean challenging the group, and most people aren't brave enough for that. The irony is that the people making these snap judgments are often the least prepared to deal with being wrong. They assume dominance without understanding resilience. They mistake calm for fear and restraint for surrender. They don't recognize discipline because it doesn't look loud. Real strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't posture. It doesn't need an audience. But to someone who relies on intimidation, that kind of quiet presence looks like an invitation. That's why first impressions are so often reversed too late. Only after damage is done does the truth come out. Only after lines are crossed does the room realize they miscalculated. The person they dismissed wasn't fragile. She was controlled. She wasn't untrained. She was measured. She wasn't alone inside herself. She carried years of experience that taught her when to endure and when to respond. But by the time that realization hits, the cost has already been paid. There's a specific kind of shock that comes from discovering you were wrong about someone in the worst possible way. It's not just surprise. It's fear mixed with shame. The realization that your confidence was built on ignorance. That the power you thought you had was borrowed from numbers, not ability. That if circumstances were different, the outcome would have been very different. First impressions reveal more about the person making them than the person receiving them. They show who feels entitled to judge without understanding, who believes strength must look a certain way, who assumes safety based on appearances, and who forgets that every person walking into a room brings a lifetime with them, whether it's visible or not. Group cruelty doesn't begin with violence. It begins with permission. Someone makes a comment that crosses a line, and no one pushes back. Someone laughs a little too hard, and it signals approval. The moment that happens, the rules change. What was unthinkable a minute ago becomes acceptable, and then it becomes normal. Once cruelty is shared, it grows faster than any single person intends. In a group, responsibility dissolves. No one feels fully accountable because everyone is involved just enough to feel included and distant at the same time. One person insults. Another repeats it. Someone else adds a shove. Each action feels smaller because it's split across multiple people. No one wakes up thinking they're going to seriously hurt someone. They wake up thinking they'll follow the tone that's already been set. The presence of an audience accelerates everything. People perform when others are watching. They exaggerate reactions. They push harder than they would alone. The need for approval overrides empathy. If the group rewards cruelty with laughter or status, it becomes currency. The person being targeted stops being a human and starts being a prop in someone else's attempt to belong or dominate. What's especially dangerous is how quickly escalation feels justified. The target is framed as deserving it. Too quiet, too weird, too confident, too weak. Once a label sticks, anything done to them feels earned. The group convinces itself that it's responding, not initiating. That the harm is reactive, not aggressive. This mental shortcut allows people to cross lines they'd swear they never would. Escalation also feeds on momentum. Each act raises the baseline for what's acceptable next. Words turn into threats. Threats turn into physical contact. Physical contact turns into real injury. By the time blood is drawn, the group has already normalized behavior that would have horrified them earlier. The speed of this shift is what makes group cruelty so destructive. There's no pause for reflection, only reaction. Another factor is diffusion of fear. In a group, fear doesn't disappear. It spreads. People sense tension and respond by tightening ranks. Aggression becomes a way to assert control over that fear. Instead of addressing discomfort, the group attacks the person who triggered it by existing. The more uncertain the group feels, the harsher the response becomes. There's also the illusion of strength that comes from numbers. Individuals who would never confront someone alone suddenly feel invincible. The group becomes armor. This false confidence leads to reckless behavior. Boundaries are ignored because consequences feel unlikely. The presence of others creates a sense of immunity, as if responsibility has been diluted beyond recognition. What makes escalation so tragic is how preventable it is. It only takes one interruption to change the direction. One person refusing to laugh. One person saying that's enough. One person breaking the rhythm. But when no one steps in, the silence becomes an endorsement. The absence of resistance is read as agreement, and the behavior continues to intensify. As cruelty escalates, empathy erodes. The target's pain becomes abstract. Injuries are minimized. Emotional responses are mocked. The group distances itself from the reality of harm by turning it into spectacle. This emotional detachment makes it easier to keep going, even when the damage is obvious. Eventually, escalation reaches a point where the group loses control of the situation it created. What started as posturing turns into real consequences. The atmosphere shifts from amusement to panic. People realize they've gone too far, but by then, there's no easy way back. The group that felt powerful moments earlier is now united by shared guilt and fear. Group cruelty escalates fast because it feeds on human instincts to belong, to dominate, and to avoid standing alone. It moves quicker than thought and louder than conscience, turning ordinary people into participants in harm they never imagined themselves capable of. Committing. Silence is often mistaken for neutrality, but in moments of abuse, it functions as reinforcement. When harm begins and no one interrupts it, the message is clear even if it's never spoken. This is allowed. This is acceptable. This will continue. Silence gives confidence to the aggressor and isolation to the person being targeted, creating an imbalance that grows heavier with every passing second. Most people don't stay silent because they agree with what's happening. They stay silent because speaking up feels risky. There's the fear of becoming the next target, the fear of social consequences, the fear of misreading the situation. People tell themselves it's not their place or that someone else will step in. That internal delay is often all it takes for a situation to spiral beyond control. Silence also disguises itself as restraint. People convince themselves they're being mature by not reacting, that they're avoiding drama or keeping the peace. But peace built on someone else's suffering isn't peace at all. It's avoidance. The person being harmed doesn't experience the quiet as calm. They experience it as abandonment. Every second of inaction reinforces the idea that they are alone and unsupported. For the aggressor, silence feels like validation. No opposition means approval. Even those who look uncomfortable but say nothing are interpreted as agreeing. The lack of resistance becomes fuel. The behavior intensifies because there's no signal telling them to stop. Silence removes friction, and cruelty thrives when there's nothing slowing it down. There's also a psychological shift that happens in observers. The longer they remain silent, the harder it becomes to speak. Each moment of inaction raises the emotional cost of stepping in. People feel complicit, and that guilt makes confrontation more uncomfortable. Instead of correcting the situation, they retreat further, hoping it will end on its own. Silence doesn't just affect the moment. It shapes memory. When people look back, they remember who spoke and who didn't. For the victim, the faces in the crowd blur together into a single realization that no one helped. That memory carries weight long after physical injuries heal. It changes how safe the world feels. It changes expectations of others. It teaches caution instead of trust. In many environments, silence is socially rewarded. People who avoid conflict are seen as easy to work with. Those who speak up are labeled difficult or disruptive. This cultural conditioning trains people to prioritize comfort over justice. The result is a system where harm can exist in plain sight as long as it doesn't inconvenience the majority. Silence also allows responsibility to be passed around without ever landing anywhere. Everyone assumes someone else is better positioned to act. Someone with more authority. Someone closer to the situation. Someone braver. In the end, no one does anything, and the harm continues uninterrupted. What makes silence especially dangerous is how invisible it is. There's no clear action to point to, no direct quote, no physical act. It leaves no immediate evidence, but its impact is profound. Silence creates the conditions where abuse feels safe to continue and difficult to challenge. Breaking silence doesn't require heroics. It can be as simple as a question, a look of disapproval, a verbal boundary. But even that small disruption can feel enormous in the moment. The fear is real, but so is the cost of staying quiet. When silence becomes the default response to cruelty, it teaches everyone involved a lesson. The aggressor learns they can continue. The victim learns they're on their own. The observers learn that safety lies in blending in. Over time, this dynamic hardens into culture, making harm easier and resistance rarer. Strength doesn't usually arrive the way people expect it to. It doesn't announce itself or demand attention. It rarely looks impressive at first glance. Real strength tends to move quietly, conserving energy, observing before acting. Because of that, it's often overlooked, dismissed, or mistaken for weakness by people who equate power with noise. Many assume strength must be visible to be real. Loud voices, aggressive posture, confidence that spills into arrogance. These signals are easy to recognize and easy to misunderstand. They feel familiar, especially in environments where dominance is rewarded. Quiet presence, on the other hand, unsettles people. When someone doesn't perform their strength, others rush to fill in the blanks with their own assumptions. Restraint is frequently misread. A person who doesn't react immediately is assumed to be incapable of reacting at all. Someone who chooses not to engage is labeled passive. In reality, restraint often comes from experience. From knowing exactly what one is capable of and choosing when, or if, it's worth showing. That choice requires control, and control is a form of strength that doesn't translate well to first impressions. Discipline operates the same way. Years of training don't show up in casual interactions. Muscle memory doesn't announce itself in conversation. Mental toughness doesn't advertise its resume. People who rely on intimidation tend to underestimate those who don't play the same game. They assume the absence of aggression means the absence of ability. This misunderstanding creates a dangerous gap between perception and reality. Those who posture believe they're in control. Those who remain calm are watching, measuring, deciding. The imbalance only exists in the mind of the observer. When pressure finally forces truth to the surface, the shift is abrupt and shocking. There's also a cultural bias toward spectacle. People are taught to admire visible confidence and quick reactions. Movies and stories glorify explosive responses, not quiet endurance. As a result, Strength that doesn't fit that narrative gets ignored. People miss the signs because they're looking for something louder. Quiet strength is built through repetition, not recognition. Through enduring discomfort without complaint. Through learning to operate under stress without broadcasting it. Through accepting responsibility without needing validation. These qualities don't draw attention, but they create stability. They allow someone to remain steady when others lose control. Those who underestimate quiet strength often do so out of insecurity. Loud dominance requires constant reinforcement. It needs an audience. It needs submission from others to feel real. When someone refuses to acknowledge it, that refusal feels like a threat. The quiet presence becomes a mirror, reflecting uncertainty back at the aggressor. This is why quiet strength is so often targeted. It disrupts the hierarchy without saying a word. It challenges assumptions just by existing. Instead of curiosity, it attracts hostility. People try to provoke a reaction, to force proof of weakness. They push boundaries, expecting collapse. What they don't realize is that restraint has limits, and those limits are intentional. Strength that doesn't advertise itself also doesn't panic. It waits. It endures. It chooses its moment based on necessity, not ego. When that moment arrives, there's no performance, only action. The most dangerous mistakes come from assuming that silence equals fear and calm equals surrender. History is full of examples where those assumptions failed catastrophically. The person who doesn't boast may be the one most prepared. The person who avoids conflict may be the one most capable of handling it. Quiet strength isn't about proving anything. It's about capability paired with judgment. About knowing what you can do and deciding when not to do it. That decision is invisible to outsiders, which makes it easy to misinterpret. People see what they expect to see, not what's actually there. When strength finally reveals itself after being dismissed, the reaction is rarely admiration. It's disbelief, followed by fear. The sudden collapse of false confidence leaves no time to adjust. The rules people thought governed the situation no longer apply, and the realization comes too late. Intimidation relies on surface-level control. It uses volume, presence, and fear to create the illusion of power. It works best when people believe it's real and lasting. But intimidation has a weakness built into it. It collapses the moment fear stops working. Training, on the other hand, doesn't depend on perception. It exists whether anyone believes in it or not. Training is quiet and repetitive. It's built in private, away from applause. It looks boring from the outside. The same movements practiced again and again. The same scenarios rehearsed until they become automatic. There's no spectacle in it, which is why people who rely on intimidation rarely respect it. They confuse invisibility with absence. Someone who is trained doesn't need to dominate a room to feel in control. Their confidence isn't borrowed from reactions or approval. It comes from knowing exactly how they'll respond under pressure because they've already done it hundreds of times. That certainty changes everything. When intimidation tries to provoke chaos, training responds with structure. Intimidation wants emotion. It feeds on panic, anger, hesitation. A trained person recognizes those reactions and neutralizes them, not by suppressing emotion, but by functioning through it. Training doesn't remove fear. It teaches how to operate despite it. That's the part intimidation never accounts for. When intimidation meets someone unprepared, it often works. People freeze. They second-guess themselves. They comply just to make the threat go away. But when intimidation meets training, it hits a wall. The tactics are familiar. The pressure is expected. The situation has been imagined and rehearsed long before it ever happens. Training creates muscle memory that bypasses hesitation. Decisions don't require debate. The body responds before the mind has time to panic. This speed isn't reckless. It's refined. It's the result of knowing what matters and ignoring what doesn't. Intimidation loses its leverage when its theatrics no longer distract. Another flaw of intimidation is that it escalates by necessity. Once it starts, it has to keep getting louder to maintain effect. Training doesn't need escalation. It stays consistent. That consistency becomes an anchor in unstable situations. While intimidation burns energy trying to maintain control, training conserves it. People who rely on intimidation often mistake aggression for competence. They assume being the most forceful person means being the most capable. Training exposes how fragile that assumption is. Aggression without skill is inefficient. It wastes movement. It creates openings. It relies on overwhelming rather than precision. Training prioritizes control. Control of movement. Control of timing. Control of response. This control allows a trained person to adapt when things don't go as planned. Intimidation doesn't adapt well. When its expected outcome fails, it turns sloppy. The cracks show quickly. There's also a psychological advantage to training that intimidation can't replicate. Trained individuals trust their preparation. That trust creates calm. Calm sharpens perception. It allows someone to notice details others miss. Intimidation narrows focus. It blinds the person using it to anything outside their own performance. The longer a confrontation lasts, the more training matters. Intimidation is strongest at the beginning, when shock and uncertainty are high. Training grows stronger with time. As adrenaline settles and patterns emerge, the trained person gains clarity while the intimidator loses momentum. Training also teaches restraint. Knowing how much force is necessary and when to stop is part of competence. Intimidation has no such boundaries. It pushes until it's forced to stop. That lack of control often creates consequences the intimidator never planned for. The biggest difference is that intimidation is a strategy for dominating others, while training is a strategy for surviving reality. One depends on fear. The other depends on preparation. When fear fails, intimidation has nothing left. Training is still there, steady, reliable, and ready. Underestimating people usually feels safe. It's a shortcut the mind takes to reduce uncertainty. When someone looks ordinary, quiet, or unfamiliar, it's easy to assume there's nothing beneath the surface worth worrying about. That assumption creates comfort. It also creates blind spots, and blind spots are where consequences grow. People underestimate others because it protects their sense of control. Believing someone is incapable makes the environment feel predictable. It allows confidence to form without effort. But that confidence is fragile because it isn't built on information. It's built on appearance, bias, and convenience. The moment reality contradicts it, the collapse is sudden and severe. There's a particular danger in underestimating those who don't seek attention. People who don't advertise their skills are often the ones who had to earn them the hard way. They learned early that competence doesn't need validation. They learned to let results speak, even if those results stay hidden most of the time. When these individuals are dismissed, they rarely correct the assumption. They simply note it. Underestimation also shapes behavior toward the person being misjudged. Boundaries loosen. Respect erodes. People say things they wouldn't say otherwise. They do things they wouldn't risk with someone they perceive as equal or superior. This shift invites escalation. The lack of caution becomes an open door. What makes this pattern dangerous is that underestimation removes hesitation. People act faster and sloppier when they believe there's no threat. They don't prepare. They don't consider consequences. They rely on dominance, numbers, or assumption to carry them through. That reliance is exposed the moment the underestimated person responds in a way that wasn't expected. The shock that follows isn't just about surprise. It's about the realization that the mental model was wrong from the beginning. The person wasn't harmless. The situation wasn't controlled. The confidence was misplaced. That realization hits all at once, leaving little time to adjust or retreat. Underestimation often flips power dynamics instantly. The person who was dismissed now holds leverage, not because they sought it, but because others surrendered it through carelessness. Respect, once lost, can't be summoned in a panic. The tone changes too late. Apologies sound hollow. Fear replaces arrogance. There's also a deeper cost to underestimating people. It reveals a failure to recognize complexity in others. It reduces humans to stereotypes and surface traits. That reduction makes cruelty easier and learning impossible. When people assume they already understand someone, they stop paying attention. Underestimation is rarely accidental. It's influenced by bias, by past experiences, by narratives people have absorbed without questioning. Certain appearances are associated with weakness. Certain behaviors are read as submission. These assumptions feel objective to the person making them, which makes them even more dangerous. The consequences of underestimation aren't always immediate or physical. Sometimes they unfold over time. Missed opportunities, broken trust, alliances lost before they were ever considered. When someone is underestimated, their potential impact is ignored until it's no longer avoidable. Those who are frequently underestimated often develop a heightened awareness of this dynamic. They learn to move quietly. They learn to observe before engaging. They learn that being misjudged can be an advantage if handled carefully. This doesn't make them passive. It makes them strategic. The real danger lies in assuming underestimation has no cost, that it's harmless to be wrong about someone. In reality, it shapes decisions, behavior, and outcomes long before the truth surfaces. By the time the mistake is clear, the damage is already done. Underestimating people isn't just a failure of perception. It's a failure of respect. And when respect is absent, consequences don't announce themselves. They arrive abruptly, reshaping the situation without warning or mercy.